Hello, all you gorgeous creative friends. Today we begin the first video in a series I'm calling Alternative Substrates to Yupo. In this video, we will focus on washers and some of the ways you can apply alcohol inks to washers. It's okay if you don't have all the supplies that I show. You don't need everything for every technique I'm going to go over. This is just a picture of the things that I used. And you're obviously going to need some washers. You can use metal and or vinyl. Here I'm showing you what the wrong side of the washers look like. They all have little marks on one side. Just flip them over and use the opposite side and you're good to go. So let's add some Pinata Rainforest green ink and some Ranger Dandelion ink to this first technique. All I did was used a felt pad on the applicator. Whoop, got a stripy design going on. Add a little more color and get rid of those stripes. I have enough ink on my felt to do a bunch of washers, but I only wanted to use 2. Now, if I had been thinking, I would have done this yellow, the Ranger Dandelion, and the Pinata brass first, because I could have done the green over it and used the same felt pad, but my brain wasn't working as usual. So I just did it backwards and went with the way that it turned out. It was fine. It's not a big deal. I cut my own felt. That's why it's in squares instead of in circles. Now this glass effect gel works really well if you don't have any resin or UV resin. I wanted to point that out real quick. It's about $8 on Amazon. The price fluctuates, but it's somewhere around there. It dries in 3 to 4 hours. You can dome it, or you can stick it in the oven for like 20 minutes and it'll dry that way. But here I'm applying UV gel to the washers, and I'm just going around the circle of the washer and leaving a strip of the UV resin. You want to be careful that you don't put too much resin on there, otherwise it will seep onto whatever paper you're using underneath it and it'll leave a great big mess. And you just don't want to deal with that. So be careful of the amount of resin that you put on. You can always use a toothpick to pull the resin to the sides of the washer. That seems to work really well. But I like using UV resin on these little projects because it's so much faster and it's so much easier than trying to, oh, there's the toothpick now, than trying to measure out enough regular resin for these tiny little washers. It's just not worth it. Now my resin did seep on that one washer, so I picked it up with a tissue, wiped it off, and I'm going to go over it again, hopefully with a little less resin this time so it doesn't seep off the end. And off the edges. And if you notice, I'm actually applying my resin on the same index card that I used to stamp my project, and everything worked out just fine. So you can use the same card over and over. So there are the washers with the resin on top, and they look gorgeous. Now let's do some basic resin coloring and some dotting with a tool. To add basic color to a washer, I just use the bottle and apply a couple of drops. And then I either use the tip of the bottle or a toothpick to there's my toothpick, to kind of spread the color out, make sure that it covers all of the edges on the inside and the outside. You don't want to overload your resin with too much ink or it takes forever to dry and it doesn't dry right. Now these are the tools I'm going to use. They're little, I think they were invented for dentists originally, but they're these little tiny tools that I use for dotting on a lot of things. So I'm going to use some Ranger Pitch Black, and I'm going to pick up my bigger of the 2 little dotting tools. And I bought these directly from China. I know that you can buy them in the US. I know that they're not that expensive. I will try to find a link and include it in the description below. I'm not positive I can do it, but I will try. But these work great for so many projects. So and you can use them over and over as well also. So I'm going to use the bigger head for the black, and here I'm shaking up some Ranger Snowcap mixative, and I'm going to use my smaller head, this one, for the white. And I'm just going to apply little white dots over the black dots that I had applied on the pink washer. So we have a pink washer with black dots and then smaller white dots on top of the black. It turned out a little bit darker than I thought it would, the pink did, but it's okay, and it's actually very cute. It would make a very cute pendant or pair of earrings or part of a bracelet. Be very cute. Now, and here I'm using my hair dryer to make sure that the ink is dry before I add the resin. You want to make sure that your ink is completely dry before you start loading resin on top of it. So again, I just squeeze a line of resin around the washer and let it self-dome. I use the toothpick to pull it out if I need to, but here it is curing under the UV lights. And there's the finished product. Isn't that darling? I think that's so cute. And you can use whatever colors you want. You can use those little applicators to make designs, all kinds of stuff. Now here's my favorite technique. This is making some veining or some wispy effects on washers. So I'm using my alcohol ink marker to color the washer, and you want to make sure that you get a good solid base of ink on the marker. It helps to have more ink rather than less ink. And I'm adding a little bit of purple to go along with the pink. And it doesn't matter if you color or if you dot your marker on there. You tend to get about the same amount of ink either way. So let's drop a little bit of 91% alcohol on there so the ink can start to bloom. And that's what really makes this technique awesome. So we'll let it bloom. And we'll let the alcohol do all the work for us. Now, it's really important to let the alcohol ink bloom until it's dry because that's what creates the wisps. So I let this dry for 5 or 10 minutes until the ink dried. I didn't want to show you that. And hey, look, it's finally dry through the magic of video. So I'm going to add just a tiny drop of alcohol where the ink pooled on the washer. And I'm going to pick up the edges of my index card. And I'm going to tilt the paper back and forth to move the ink in different spots. So you want to get the ink flowing around the outside of the washer and then let it sit for a second so it can dry a little bit. And then you want to move it some more so that the ink can move to a different spot. Let it sit for a second so that it can dry a little bit and then move it again. And that's what creates all those gorgeous wisps and veining that everybody's so crazy about. That's why this is my favorite technique. The results that you get from it are absolutely gorgeous. But it works better if you tilt your paper slowly and gently and then let it sit for a minute so that the ink can dry where it is, and then continue with your tilting and move it a little bit more and let it dry again. You know, just kind of tilt and let it dry, tilt and let it dry. I'm so glad that you're joining me for this video, and I really hope that you're learning lots about different ways you can use alcohol inks besides just on Yupo. Yupo is the first thing everybody thinks about when talking about alcohol inks as their substrate, but there are so many other things you can use besides Yupo, and I hope in this series I can teach you about a whole bunch of them. I think at last count there were about 12 videos in this series that I'm getting ready to put out, so I hope that you will join me for all of those. The best thing is to subscribe to my videos to make sure that you don't miss out on any of the upcoming videos in the series. So let's add some more ink to this washer, but be careful not to color over where you already have some veining. Just color on the plain spots that you're not crazy about. And then you want to add another drop of the 91% alcohol. And just over the part that you colored. You don't want to add it over your veining or you're going to lose that veining. So when you put the alcohol on the ink starts to bloom, and it will push your alcohol ink around your washer into different spots. I know it looks like my ink is just sitting there not doing anything, but if you look really hard, you'll see that it is moving and changing and making different designs. So you just continue to let it bloom and dry. There it goes, it's dry. There's really not much more to it. So let's add some resin to this. I love that UV resin for these little projects. So we're going to add a little bit of that to this washer. And then we'll be able to slide this under the lights. And these are gorgeous when they're finished. I would love to make some earrings out of different sized washers or bracelets or a necklace. It just, oh, there's so many ideas. So there's the finished washer, and I hope you can get a good idea of what that looked like. So now let's try this strange supply called basic dye. I couldn't think of a word to use. It's not something you would normally use with alcohol inks, or at least I wouldn't think to use it with alcohol inks. You want to use, they come in 8 colors, and I've chosen to use turquoise. I have used way too much dye in this, and you can see the tiny amount that I put out. The bottles of dye will last you forever. So let's use some Marabu lemon and mix that in there. So remember, it's mixing with the turquoise dye color, and I'm going to use some Ranger alcohol ink in shell pink and let that kind of move and groove with the yellow and the turquoise basic dye powder. And you can see the turquoise dye, how it's interacting with both colors. So I'm going to take a toothpick and I'm going to move some of that dye around. I should not have used anywhere close to that much dye, but oh well, live and learn. So I'm going to pull some of that dye around to make some different designs. But I wanted to keep this piece really organic, so I'm not trying to control the dye in any way. I'm just pulling it down to make sure that there are some designs that cover most of the washer. So I let it dry, and because it's so bland looking, I'm going to add some more alcohol ink. Now, when you add more alcohol ink, it does reactivate the dye powder also. So when you use Jacquard's basic dye, you really get a ton for your money, and it works over and over and has a really cool effect with these alcohol ink colors. This basic dye is really a neat product that I can't wait to explore more. So you can see that it's turned everything green because someone used too much. And although that says 99% alcohol, it's really 91% alcohol. I just never, it used to be 99%. I ran out. Since then, I've bought 91%. I've just never changed the label on the bottle. But I put some of that down so that it could start pushing and moving some of the colored ink around to see what kind of designs I could get. And you can really see at the bottom of the washer, you can really see how it's pushing that green ink up on the right side and really making a difference on that side. Especially if you keep watching it for a minute, you'll be able to tell that it is doing something. So I certainly didn't invent using alcohol ink on washers, but I do have to admit I did absolutely no research for this video. None. Every method I'm using came out of my own noggin today. I had so much fun using alcohol inks on washers that I had so much fun using alcohol inks on washers that I had to leave out many of the techniques I came up with. It was so hard to stop creating things. So I hope you like the ideas that I've included in this video. And if you do, it would mean a ton to me if you would please give me a thumbs up and subscribe, because I would love to have you as part of our little YouTube family. I'm trying to grow my channel, so every person helps. Really, you do. And that way you'll be notified of future videos when I post more for this series, because there are some cool things coming up. So I've added more alcohol to this washer. Now the washer is pretty dry at this point, so it may not make much of a difference, but it never hurts to try. So let's just see if it does anything. And you can see after I let it dry for a few minutes that it did kind of make a difference. I'm going to fill that pale spot in with some more Marabu lemon color and kind of stretch it out with my toothpick. And I think that's a pretty little washer. I can definitely see that being a pendant or a keychain. Very pretty. So I'm going to dry this with my heat gun. Those really dark places of green ink, actually got pretty thick, and I wanted to make sure that my ink was dry before I put the resin over it. So I used my heat gun for just a second to make sure that everything was dry, sliding it onto an index card. I'm going to test it here in just a second to make sure that the ink is dry, and it is. So we're good to go. This is the resin that I use. It comes in a soft type and a hard type. You really want the hard type. So I just start kind of towards the bottom of the washer, and I don't push the resin out. I just let it naturally come out on its own. I don't squeeze the bottle at all. And I should mention that this video is sped up by 75%. So no, I don't normally craft this fast at all. So let's add some gold foil flakes. Just because this is the brand that I have on hand and used does not mean that you need to use this brand at all. You could even use gold leafing and carefully just pick up tiny sections of the leafing sheet and use those. There's all kinds of things you could use. So right now I'm just pulling some of the resin to the very edge of the washer. I want to make sure that the whole thing is covered. And I want to make sure that my toothpick has some resin on it so I can pick up those little gold foil flakes. It makes it a lot easier. And as I fiddle with these flakes, what I'm actually doing is pushing them down into the resin and making sure that they're covered with resin. Because if you just set them on top, they will wear off. The gold flake will wear off so quickly. It's just not worth even putting it on. And then you have this ugly little nubby spot. It's really unattractive. So I'm pushing all of my gold foil flake, not easy to say, into my resin, and I'm letting the resin fold itself over the gold foil flake so that everything is buried down inside the resin. And I have no rhyme or reason as to where I'm putting the foil. It's just wherever kind of it lands, wherever I stick it is where it goes. I do not know what I'm going to do with these washers. If you guys would like to see a video of me turning them into jewelry and different things, please leave me a comment and let me know. And I would be more than happy to show you what I'm going to do with these washers. But I didn't make a video on that because I didn't know if anyone would be interested. So please let me know if that's something you'd like to see. But I just put this foil all around the washer and didn't worry about which was going to be the top and which was going to be the bottom. I didn't worry about where a cord might go or where, you know, I just didn't worry about any of that stuff. So there is no top or bottom or rhyme or reason to this washer. I just put the gold foil flake kind of wherever it felt good. Easy enough to do. And like I said, this is the first video in the series I'm doing on different substrates you can use besides Yupo. Yupo is a fantastic substrate for alcohol inks, but it's expensive. So I usually use Kirkland photo paper instead of Yupo because I can get 150 sheets for the cost of about 10 sheets of Yupo. Oop. I'm picking up all the little pieces that flew out when I tried to close that container. That's one of the hardest parts of doing this, is closing that container without getting foil everywhere. So it looks good. I'm finished. I'm just going to take this now and pop it under the UV lights. And it's out. It's been cooked. It's ready to go. Look how beautiful that is. I couldn't get my camera to focus on it very well, but I hope you get the idea of how beautiful that is. So now let's look at a medley of techniques that I did on different washers. I know that I already showed you guys this technique using the applicator and the felt pad, but I'm making another one that's going to be totally different. So I wanted to show you step by step how I get through it from the very beginning. and there's that Marabu rainbow ink. It's like this iridescent glitter in an alcohol ink form, and it is absolutely delicious. I love it. Love it. So here we're going to use a little bit of Ranger Snowcap. These are thin copper washers, so they were a little bit more difficult to do, but not impossible by any means. They just took a little bit of extra time. So let's add some denim to both washers. Wow, that kind of took over that bigger washer, didn't it? And some Ranger Clover. Put a little bit of that on each one. That kind of took over too. And now we're going to add some of Ranger's copper mixative. Because these are copper washers, I thought adding some copper mixative might really bring out that copper tone. So I'm going to use my toothpick to kind of swirl and dab different colors into each other. Really pretty. And get everything a little bit mixed up. You know, the way that the colors interact, especially with that snow cap, you can get some really neat effects. So part of this turned like a pastel blue, and part of it turned, it's white on the bottom, and then there's like a top layer of almost transparent blue stuff over the top of it. It's really cool. You can see the different layers on it, even though I only did technically one layer. So here we are using the same piece of felt that I used for the first washer that we just talked about. And because I'm using darker colors, I'm just going to use the same piece of felt. It's no big deal. And I'm going to just apply my colors to this metal washer. I just want a pleasing pattern, and I want to make sure that the whole washer is covered. And then I'm going to take my spray bottle and I'm going to spritz a couple of quick sprays over the top of the washer. You don't want to overspray. You just want a couple of quick spritzes over it. And you want to let the veining and the blooming and everything wonderful that's going to happen, just let it happen organically. So we're going to push that to the side, and we're going to move on to the next set of washers. So when you apply ink this way, you don't want to over apply it. You just want to add a couple of drops and then either use the nose, the tip of the bottle, or a toothpick to help move the ink around. You don't need to add a ton of ink. If you do that, it just takes forever to dry, and it'll dry splotchy, and it's just kind of a mess. So usually 3 drops is about what I add for this size washer. I think these are like 1-inch washers. So I use my toothpick because I love my toothpick, and make sure that all of the edges, the inner edges and the outer edges, are all covered in color. Very simple. And a toothpick is a very good tool to make sure that everything gets covered. And they're cheap, which is an even better reason to use them. So I just use the toothpick to kind of cover the outside edges. Make sure that you wipe it off in between colors, or you will transfer colors between projects. I promise you will. So let's apply some Pinata brass to the washer that has the Ranger Wild Berry on it. And then we're going to add some 91% isopropyl alcohol. I added it right next to each drop of the Pinata brass, and then I decided that wasn't enough, so I added another drop on top of each of the Pinata brass drops. And I'm going to add a little bit more where the ink seems to have really kind of conglomerated. And here's the old toothpick. And what I did was I used the brass and I pushed it all around the edges, the inner and the outer edges of this washer. Now you could apply it to just the center of the washer. You could apply it to the whole thing. You know, you could have just let it sit and done what it wanted to do and just lived with the splotchy look that it made at first. That would have been beautiful too. But this is one of my favorites. I absolutely love how this turned out. It turned out brass around the edges, the inner and outer edges, and then it had this beautiful wild berry color in the center, and there was still some copper in the center also. So it was just beautiful when it was finished. So let's clean things up just a little bit. take a sip of my water. Here I'm using a Lumacolor pen to write the word fly on that first washer we did in this section. You could write any word on this, really. You could even use the pen to just decorate the washer, just doodle on it. That would be cute too. But I wrote the word fly and I added some little circles to give it a little decoration. And now I'm using a Posca pen, a white Posca pen, to doodle on this other washer. And all I'm doing is drawing circles around the inner circle of the washer. And I'm breaking those circles up and making part of them dotted lines so that they're not just circles. It just increases the interest in the piece, and it just makes it look like it's got a little texture rather than just having circles. You could do just circles if you want. It would be cool. So I'm just continuing to draw circles around this washer. And they don't need to be perfect at all. That's part of the charm of this technique, is kind of the more wonky they are, the cuter the overall piece is. So just keep drawing your circles until you run out of room. Oh, and I was going to say, going back to the Yupo and the Kirkland photo paper, sometimes it's just fun to work on different surfaces. And I have all sorts of ideas in store for you in this series. We will learn about lots of unconventional surfaces, so you'll want to stay tuned for those upcoming videos. You really will. So we got that one done. Now let's add some Ranger Silver mixative to the denim washer we did. Now I'm also adding new drops of denim because the other ones had dried, and I just wanted to be able to run them together. And here's some of that awesome Marabu rainbow again. I love that stuff. I would put it in every project I made. I do. I love that stuff. The more glitter and bling and sparkle there is, the more I love it. Unfortunately, my children won't let me bedazzle my house, or I would do the floors. I saw a bathroom once that had the entire bathroom, the floors, the walls, the ceiling, were all done in crystals. And oh, it was gorgeous. All right, now let's move on to vinyl washers. Vinyl washers are a little bit different. They react a little bit differently than metal washers do. So we're going to use some Marabu Magenta and some Marabu Caribbean to get that washer done. So let's pounce that on there with the applicator. And unfortunately, because it's a vinyl washer, it didn't take the ink as brightly as a metal washer would have. So it's pretty, but it's really, really light. And I don't like light. I don't do light stuff. My stuff has to be bright and deep. So we're going to add some deeper colors, which for this one, we're going to use Ranger's Sailboat Blue. And we're also going to use Ranger's Raspberry. And we're going to put a couple drops on our felt pad. And we're going to try, oh, and we're going to add the Pinata Brass. I forgot about that. We're going to bling it up a little bit and add a couple drops of the Jacquard Pinata Brass. And see how much better that looks already? Even with just a couple of quick stamps or swipes, it's already better. That's going to be gorgeous once we resin it. That's going to be a gorgeous washer. So here are all the washers we've created in this little section of this video. And all we need to do for these now is add the resin. So going back, I have so many unconventional surface ideas. You're not going to want to miss them. I'm really excited about showing them to you guys. So make sure that you subscribe so that you can be notified when the new videos in the series are posted, because this is going to be such a super fun adventure. It's going to be so awesome. And some of them are home decor ideas. So you'll get some ideas for your house with using alcohol inks. Doesn't get much better than that. Okay, so if you look, my first thin copper washer that I just put resin on, the one to the left, it's the middle left row, middle washer. You can see that the resin is seeping off of the washer and onto my paper. So you have two choices. You can either pick it up and use the tissue like I did before on the one that seeped before and wipe it off and go that route, redo it. Or I discovered if you put it under the lights just like that, and it gets worse by the second, it continues to seep. If you just put it under the lights like that, when you take it out, I ran my X-Acto blade around the inside of the ring, just real gently. It wasn't difficult at all, and it just peeled right apart. It came off so easy. So rather than trying to wipe off mistakes like that from now on, I'm going to try the X-Acto knife technique because it came off so easy. It was ridiculous. Because this one starts to seep also. See where it starts to seep at the top? They're just so hard. These little tiny copper washers are just so difficult to get the right amount of resin on. So let's wrap up with doing a vinyl washer. And we're going to use pearl inks. So right now I'm laying down some Alchemy, which is that fun, bright, sunny yellow color. Love that color. I love the pearls. Now we're going to add some Intrigue, which is that pink kind of purpley, wonderful spring summer color. And then let's add some Tranquil, which is the blue. And I just love adding these to different projects because when you first put pearls down, they undulate and they mix together, and the amount of sparkle that just spins around in there is incredible. It's absolutely amazing. If you don't have some pearl alcohol inks, you won't know what I'm talking about because you really do have to see it to believe it. But if you have some pearl alcohol inks, you really need to sit there and just watch them under a light because, oh, they are spectacular. Absolutely spectacular. So it's important to let these dry naturally. You want the colors to mingle. It's kind of like where you would wear your pearls. You would wear your pearls to somewhere that you would mingle, right? Like to a party. So you want to use these pearls like they're going to a party and let them mingle. So I let them dry for about 15 minutes and they dulled out pretty good. It's really dull now. But we're going to fix that. We are going to make that all better now. We're going to add our UV resin, and we're just going to use a little coat to go all the way around. Remember, because the resin domes and spreads. You can add a little bit more here and there, but you don't need a ton. And you can always use the toothpick to spread it around if you need to and cover, bring it out to the edges if necessary. Now we're going to put it under the UV lights so it can cure for 2 to 4 minutes. And look what you've got at the end. Isn't that gorgeous? That, my friends, is gorgeous. And I'm glad you joined me for this video. I hope that you learned something about alcohol inks and washers. Give me a thumbs up and subscribe. And guess what? I'll see you in the next video. Take care.